Praise the Lord and welcome. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining us for today's explainer. We're going to be unpacking Exodus chapter 8. And let me tell you, on the surface, sure, it's an ancient text about these epic cinematic plagues, frogs, gnats, flies, just decimating the land of Egypt. But as I was really digging into this, it hit me as this incredibly compelling, deeply personal story about human nature. It's about stubbornness, high-stakes negotiations, and honestly, what happens when undeniable truth is just staring us right in the face. We're going to track this escalating tension between Moses and Pharaoh, and I promise you, the psychology at play here is just as relevant to us today as it was thousands of years ago. So let's jump right in. So think about this. Have you ever found yourself in a massive crisis? Maybe you had this terrible flu, or you were staring down an impossible deadline at work, and you made a desperate bargain. Like, just get me through this, and I swear I'm going to change my habits. But the second you felt better, the very moment the pressure was off, you went right back to your old ways. Right? We've all kind of been there. Well, that right there is the entire central conflict of Exodus 8. Pharaoh's mindset is perfectly captured here. He makes all these promises when he's backed into a corner, but the absolute second there's a breather, a respite, he hardens his heart. This is going to be a major recurring theme, so definitely keep it in mind as we watch the pressure cook. Now, what's really fascinating here is the sheer overwhelming scale of the threat God commands Moses to deliver. We're moving into the second plague now. The Nile River, which, remember, is the literal lifeblood of Egypt, is about to become ground zero for absolute chaos. Moses basically tells Pharaoh, let the people go or a massive plague of frogs is going to overrun everything. And we're not just talking about a minor nuisance at the riverbank. This is a total disruption of everyday order. To really wrap our heads around this, just imagine a severe pest infestation in your own home. Or better yet, a massive plumbing disaster where a pipe bursts and water is just gushing into every single room. But instead of water, it's literally thousands of frogs. The text gets so specific. They're in the houses, the bedrooms, the beds, the ovens, even the kneading bowls for their bread. It's an intimately invasive disaster. You can't sleep, you can't cook, you can't find a single quiet corner to just breathe. It is a very real-world example of complete systemic breakdown. But wait, it gets crazier. Pharaoh, of course, has his own experts. And the text tells us that the Egyptian magicians actually use their secret arts to replicate this plague, bringing up even more frogs onto the land. I mean, just think about how completely absurd that is for a second. Going back to our analogy, it's exactly like your house is aggressively flooding, and instead of fixing the pipe, the plumber you hired comes in and intentionally busts another pipe just to show off that he can do it too. They matched the miracle, sure, but they couldn't solve the actual problem. They literally only made the misery worse. And honestly, that brilliantly illustrates exactly why Pharaoh finally cracks. His own magicians can't make the frogs go away. So in desperation, Pharaoh calls in Moses and Aaron, and he starts negotiating. He begs them to plead with the Lord to remove the frogs, and in exchange, he throws down a massive concession. He says he will let the people go. For the very first time, we are seeing the mighty ruler of Egypt actually bend under the weight of the pressure. So Moses agrees to the deal. He prays to the Lord, and exactly as requested, the frogs die. But man, the aftermath is incredibly grim. They died out in the houses, the courtyards, the fields. The Egyptians had to physically shovel them into these massive rotting heaps, and it explicitly notes that the entire land stank. So the active crisis is technically over, but there's this foul, lingering mess left behind. It's a great reminder that our actions have consequences that definitely stick around. But here is the real kicker. What happens next? The smell is awful, sure, but the active threat of frogs literally jumping into their ovens is gone. The pressure is off. And, just like we talked about at the very beginning, the moment there's a respite, Pharaoh completely reneges on his deal. He hardens his heart and just refuses to listen. Which actually brings up a great, practical, first actionable step for our own daily lives. Keep your word when the crisis passes. You see, true integrity isn't tested when our backs are pinned against the wall. It's tested when the pressure vanishes and we suddenly have the option to back out. And Pharaoh completely failed this test. Because of that broken promise, the escalation is instant. There's no morning meeting with Pharaoh this time. The Lord simply tells Moses to have Aaron strike the dust of the earth with his staff. In a flash, the very ground the Egyptians are walking on transforms into the third plague, just massive swarms of gnats covering man and beast alike. Now look at the stark difference between these two events. On the one hand, with the frogs, the magicians successfully used their secret arts to replicate the plague. But on the other hand, with the gnats, they try their old tricks again, and they completely fail. The text is incredibly blunt. They could not. The escalation here is undeniable. The cheap parlor tricks have run out, and human expertise has finally hit a hard, unbreakable ceiling. Which leads to this absolute bombshell of an admission from Pharaoh's own inner circle. The magicians literally turn to Pharaoh and say, "This is the finger of God." I mean, they know they are completely outmatched. And there is our second actionable step for daily application: know when to concede. Look, when you are clearly proven wrong, or when you're staring down an undeniable truth, the strongest, wisest thing you can possibly do is just admit it, exactly like these magicians did. So, does Pharaoh listen to his own top advisors? Not a chance. The pattern repeats. Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he wouldn't listen to them, exactly as the Lord had predicted. His pride runs so incredibly deep that he's actually willing to let his entire nation suffer, just so he doesn't have to swallow his pride and admit defeat. That deep-seated stubbornness, it directly triggers plague number 4. God tells Moses to get up early in the morning and confront Pharaoh as he goes out to the water. And the threat this time is thick, swarming clouds of flies. But this specific plague introduces a totally new dynamic that fundamentally shifts the entire story. We see a hard, deliberate division here. God declares he's going to put a boundary between his people and Pharaoh's people. So in Egypt, the houses are completely choked with flies, and the land is effectively ruined. But over in the land of Goshen, where the Israelites live, it is entirely protected, not a single fly. Think of it like a highly targeted power outage during a massive storm, where just one specific neighborhood keeps all its lights on, while the rest of the city goes pitch black. It's undeniable proof of a targeted divine intervention. The utter devastation of the land forces Pharaoh right back to the negotiating table. And this back and forth is fascinating. First, Pharaoh tries a half measure. He says, "Okay, go sacrifice to your God, but you have to stay within the land." But Moses refuses, and he gives a highly strategic, real-world reason. The animals the Israelites need to sacrifice are considered sacred to the Egyptians. Doing that in plain sight would be a cultural abomination, and Moses points out that his people would literally be stoned by angry mobs. So Pharaoh finally relents a bit and says they can go into the wilderness, just not very far away. Moses agrees to pray for the flies to leave. And this is where we get our third actionable step: negotiate with firm boundaries. Moses didn't just accept a terrible deal because he was desperate for immediate relief. He assessed the actual reality of the situation and held his ground for what was really required. But listen, Moses is definitely not naive. Look at this incredibly pointed warning he issues right before he leaves to pray. Only let not Pharaoh cheat again. Moses is calling out the elephant in the room. He knows Pharaoh's track record. He knows these promises have been totally empty before. It is such a bold, courageous move to look the most powerful man in the world in the eye and speak truth to power like that. So Moses goes out, he prays to the Lord, and the response is just incredibly precise. The Lord completely removes the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, his servants, and his people. The text really emphasizes it: not one remained. Total, absolute relief, exactly as promised. And yet, what happens? You guessed it, the pattern cements itself. The text explicitly says Pharaoh hardened his heart, this time also, and once again refused to let the people go. The immediate crisis fades away. The flies are gone, and Pharaoh's massive ego instantly takes the wheel again. It is a deeply tragic cycle of human stubbornness. If we just take a step back and look at the overall timeline of Chapter 8, it's really a masterclass in escalation. Time 1 with the frogs, the plague was matched by human hands. Time 2 with the gnats, it was totally unmatched, and the experts themselves admitted it was God. By time 3 with the flies, the plague became highly targeted, actively dividing the land and protecting God's people. The stakes are getting higher and higher, the evidence is becoming more and more undeniable, and yet Pharaoh's resistance is only getting firmer. Which leaves us with a pretty heavy question to chew on. When absolute, undeniable proof is met with a continually hardened heart, what happens next? When you have totally exhausted all the warnings and a leader flat out refuses to change course, a breaking point isn't just possible, it's inevitable. We're going to have to see exactly what that breaking point looks like in our next explainer. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today to unpack these powerful lessons on keeping promises, setting boundaries, and acknowledging the truth. Please make sure that share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time.